channel real quick. I can see when it goes. And is it on? Oh, my internet. I should have chose a different internet network. Still waiting. I'm going to try to switch it real quick. It's going to say my connection's dead for like 1 second. I got to switch to this different... maybe. There we go. It's reconnected. All right, cool. All right, cool. We are live. Yeah, I had to... I have a... Like, my router had a really cool experience because, again... Like many of the people on this podcast, you're someone that I know via the internet, via language learning from Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And it's really cool to finally be able to sit and chat about this passion of both of ours, which is languages. So I'm going to share this stuff to social media, as I always do. And if you want to take just a second to... introduce yourself or tell what you do. You can do that, and we'll get started.
Sure. My name is Tyler. I am a language learner. My day job, I guess, I'm a behavioral therapist. But I love to learn languages. Right now, I'm learning Norwegian. I speak French to a relatively decent degree some days. I've also studied Icelandic and Irish and a little bit of Italian and Portuguese for a few months, and Chinese, Mandarin Chinese for like a day. But my language learning journey started when I was a little kid. I grew up in Utah and in a very Mormon family, and my relatives would go off and be missionaries for 2 years.
Okay.
And they would get sent off. I remember I had an aunt who went to Sweden, and I had an uncle who went to Spain, and that kind of was the first seed of my love for languages, because I thought that my aunt being in Sweden was just the most amazing thing, and I always was looking at a world map to see, like, where am I and where is she and what language do they speak there. They don't even speak English. Of course, they speak it better than we do, but
sure.
As a 4-year-old, and so that enthralled me to think that she lived here in Utah back then. I'm in Florida now, but she lived in Utah, and now she's in Sweden on the complete other side of the world with a different culture and a different language. And I just thought that sounded like a grand adventure. And then when I became a young adult and it was my turn to go be a missionary, I got sent to Idaho. So I didn't get to learn a language as a missionary, but I rubbed shoulders with people from all over the world. And it was a fellow missionary who taught me a little bit of Portuguese. And he's the first person who told me that I had some skill at learning languages, because I picked up quite a bit of Portuguese for the couple of weeks that we were working on it. And I got to the point where we could talk about, have simple conversations about, man, doesn't that guy walking down the street look weird, and stuff like that. But then when I got home from that, and I had a big transition in my life, and I moved away from everything that was in my past, and my real first steps on my language learning journey happened in 2014, 2013. I got engaged to my now wife, and we decided that rather than get married in the backyard, we were going to get married in Ireland. Mm-hmm. And while we were over there in Europe, we were also going to go to Paris for 3 days and Venice for 4 days. And so I thought to myself, okay, in Ireland, they mostly speak English, so I'll be fine there. Italians love Americans, so I'll be fine there. And I'm making sweeping generalizations here.
Right.
But then I thought about Paris, and I was like, man, I don't want to be that guy, that American guy that doesn't speak any French. So, and I had taken like a quarter of French in high school and failed miserably at it. But the French language has always interested me. Mm-hmm. So having the impending 3-day journey in Paris ahead of me, I decided to learn as much French as I could in the time that I had, and so I got on Duolingo, and I think at first Duolingo was pretty much all I was using.
Mm-hmm.
By the time I got to Paris, I could be polite. I could ask for food and for the bathroom, and just rudimentary survival phrases, but just those, and lots of politeness spread all around. I loved Paris, and I found the Parisian people to be wonderful and accommodating and very patient with my terrible French.
Mm-hmm.
And so the seed of my language journey was fulfilled, but when I got home, I just kept going, and I got through the French Duolingo tree and found a native speaker to be my friend and to help me learn, and now I'm doing Norwegian and Icelandic and Irish, and now I love it.
Yeah, that's cool. I have a very special like appreciation for people that learn French. Like I know people are like, oh man, Mandarin Chinese is hard or Japanese is hard, and I can do all that stuff, but when like I can handle tones easier than I can handle not pronouncing half a word.
Right. Yeah, and that's really difficult in French, and also it took me like several months of dedicated practice in all of my downtime. Like I'd just be sitting there and I'd just be practicing the French R, air, 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 over and over again.
Yeah.
The pronunciation is just a bear, and it made it so that when I picked up Icelandic, Icelandic pronunciation is pretty difficult too, but it's not French.
Right.
And so where I'd read online where they're like, oh my God, this Icelandic pronunciation, when I got into it, I was a little bit intimidated, but then I'm like, oh, this is not bad.
Yeah. No, that's cool. I love that Icelandic is. I spoke with Michael from Polyglot Files. Was it yesterday? No, the day before, and he was talking about Icelandic as well. I'm gonna go ahead. There's a couple people that are commenting already, and usually it doesn't happen this fast, so I'm just gonna go ahead and read a couple of these. People saying hello, welcome to the stream. That is cool. Or not a couple. There's one specific. It says, and just for information stuff. I do have some stuff that I've got set aside for you, especially like stuff that we talked about on Twitter and stuff, but. This person, Devluca, DVLUCA, however you say that. How do you think language learning will change or advance in the next 50 years? That's actually a pretty interesting question. What do you want to go? I'll let you go on that one first if you want.
Way to just this viewer just kicks me right out of my comfort zone right away.
I can go because I
no, I got it. I can do this. Okay, so I think the thing. Well, I think it depends on what part of the world you're in.
Sure.
Because I think here in America, there's a very solid culture of not learning languages, and I think that that's slowly changing, especially as Spanish becomes more prevalent across the country, and more people know and are familiar with the Chinese community in the area, or the Indian community in the area. People are getting more exposure to different cultures and different languages, and the interest is slowly building. Yeah. But I live out in rural Florida, and I wager that if I took a survey of the people in my neighborhood, very few of them, if any, would know much more than the rudimentary like adios and amigos of Spanish, and probably would, if I asked them if they knew anything about Hindi, they'd probably be like, "What's that?" But
yeah.
But I think that as our planet and our the whole world is becoming more globalized, and the world is becoming a smaller place, and I think that as that globalization increases, I think that the two things will happen. We'll start to lose some of the smaller languages. And that's something that I am very interested in. Most of the languages that I'm interested in learning are not at all useful in America.
Right. I can
but
understand that.
yeah, um, but so we'll start to lose some of the smaller languages that aren't very much spoken, but also people's access to the bigger language groups will increase, and
Mm-hmm.
it might be, um, it's starting to become a thing where if you're a business person and you're in manufacturing, excuse me, it might become advantageous for you to know some Mandarin.
Mm-hmm.
You know, my mother-in-law is a materials engineer, and at her last company there was another engineer there who they would send to India because they were doing textiles, and that's where all their textiles were manufactured. And so it would be advantageous for him to learn whatever Indian language was spoken in that region.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that as the world becomes more globalized, there are more opportunities for that language learning to be advantageous. And I think in America, that's what drives any kind of new learning. Is it an advantage for me?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't really like that. I wish that people would just learn to learn, but
Yeah.
that's the way Americans are. What's in it for me? And so I think that as the world becomes more globalized, it'll become more advantageous to learn a second language. I mean, my daughter is 3, and she's learning Spanish in her preschool. My nephew is 10, and he's studying Spanish kind of in earnest at his school. And I know in my high school we had Japanese and Russian and Spanish and French.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I grew up, well, my teenage years were in Alaska, and in Alaska there's a lot of Russian
Right.
classes.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so I think that I think that people will have more access to it. Um, yeah, that's my answer. I'm not going to ramble on anymore.
No, I gotcha. I think just to kind of coattail off that, I agree. I think that because we're slowly, seeing that change now, and the only thing you can go is based on history. And I know there are a lot more people now learning languages than there was a decade ago. I think
Yeah,
some of the big stuff that has helped is in particular when you're seeing I'm speaking specifically from an American standpoint. Um, you're seeing people like Moses McCormick who can help influence the African American community. He has,
mm-hmm.
the woman that can do that too. So I think you're branching into that. You've got a lot of women now that are, well, women have always learned languages, but you're starting to see women become big in the polyglot community too. Lindy Williams,
Mm-hmm.
Ophelia, Lindy, like some of these people who are getting just as big as your Steve Kaufmans and your Luca Lampriellos. And I think that everybody wants somebody to relate to.
Right.
And I think as relatability has went up, and you see these people that aren't just kind of your everyday person, for the people who aren't like me or you or whatever, and they see these people who are doing this stuff, it says, hey, why can't I do that?
Right.
Now that is specifically from an American standpoint.
Yeah,
Um,
I think around the world, one thing that really impressed me when I was in Europe is just how many people spoke other languages. I mean,
mhm,
even in Ireland, which is a fairly conservative country for Europe, the cab driver that we had in Dublin spoke French and German because he had to ferry French and German tourists around Dublin, and so he learned it. And on when I took a train from Paris to Venice, like I barely heard any English at all, and it was all Italian and German. And there were people who would, speak German and then turn around and speak French and then turn around and
mhm.
speak Italian, and it really impressed me just how many people knew languages just because of where they lived, and it makes
Yeah.
me jealous because in America it's American and stuff. So
Yeah, I think part of it is that from where, because America is so huge, but if you live, say in a certain spot of France, I mean, within I don't know a couple of hours, you can be in multitude of countries, just or any of those
right,
countries really. If you're in a corner of a country, you can be in boom, 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 boom. I mean, from Spanish, you can be. I mean, Spanish from Spain. I mean, you can be in Morocco, or I mean, you know what I mean. Like you can be
yeah,
anywhere, and I think it's hard for us.
yeah. If I drive 7 hours, I'm still in the U.S. So.
Yeah, yeah.
But I do think I've been listening to this lecture on the Great Courses Plus about the history of human language, and there's one lecture that dives into the languages of the First Nations people, and like there is a remarkable diversity of languages here in the U.S.
Hmm.
that is underneath the current of English and Spanish. That they're pretty much only known to linguists and First Nations people, but there is like a linguistic diversity in the U.S. that's pretty fascinating that I didn't know about. It kind of blew my mind to know
Hmm.
about it.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely. Um, well, I mean, you got to think. I think about the video of Tim Donner speaking all those languages, and I mean, he's in New York City. Um, if you're in a big place like that, you have it. But honestly, even small areas like mine, I constantly joke about there being about 5,000 people here, but within and it might be like 7,500, but I'm not in like Los Angeles or something
Right,
but within 30 to 45 minutes, there's Mandarin Chinese, Cantonese Chinese, there's Korean, there's Indonesian, there is Romanian, there is Greek, there's I mean that's six, just me, boom, boom, boom. And if I thought about it, I would
right.
think of a couple of others. I know there's a Russian woman because I met a Russian woman at an art exhibit. My uncle's an artist, like a really, really good artist, and he's always in these art exhibits and stuff. And I went there and there was like a Russian woman there. So yeah, it's I think that, and that's one thing that I think Americans could do a better job of, because a lot of people in other countries would kill to have the opportunity to be able to, I can drive 5 minutes down the road and speak Spanish. I can go to this Mexican restaurant. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I
The
work I
opportunity's
work in an
there.
elementary school when schools are not shut down.
Right. Yeah.
I work in an elementary school during the daytime, and there's probably once a week where I think to myself, that would have been a lot easier if I knew Spanish.
Yeah, right.
But and my town, I live in Gainesville, so we have about 130,000 people or
Well,
something. But it's not a massive city. But in Gainesville, especially if you go over by the university, you can hear all kinds of languages spoken.
oh, I'm sure. Yeah,
So
you're in Tim Tebow country.
yeah, that's right.
I got a couple things here. Again, man, since people are commenting, I figure we can just roll with some of this stuff for
Yeah.
for the little bit. Lang Depot. Nope, this is tongue tied blog. Uh, anyway, it says I know you said in your childhood, but when did you have a drive to actively study languages?
Right. So I took a quarter of French in high school. That was an active study, but I failed horribly. When I started going to college, I tried to take Russian and failed horribly, and then I tried to take Spanish and failed horribly. And not all of that was because I sucked. Part of it was, you know, mental health issues and things like that.
Mm.
But my real start into pushing to actually learn another language was in about 2014, 2013, the end of 2013 into 2014.
Gotcha. Okay. And I just saw which I just commented on the Facebook on the chat. I now see why they said Lang Depot, because I still had Lang Depot in the in the
So,
in the comment section, because I don't make a new stream because there's so much to it. I just copy the stream
yeah.
over. So that is why. Next question is: do you think an international language? I'm excited about this question because I, just being an Esperanto person. But do you think an international language like Esperanto will ever be put in place again, or the idea of an international language is just English? Um, that's a good question.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, so first of all, Esperanto is the most ambitious thing I've ever heard of. I mean,
Mhm.
just the League of Nations that kind of said, "Hey, why don't we try and do this?" was
Yeah.
was intensely ambitious in of itself. Um, I don't speak any Esperanto. I've never spoken it, but constructed languages are something that I've discovered fairly recently. I'd love to learn Tokipona, but
Yeah,
I
me
guess
too.
to the question, I think it's more likely that one language will eventually dominate the others, and I actually don't think it'll be English. I kind of I'm a huge nerd, so I think it'll be like Firefly, and we'll have like Chinese idioms in our speech.
I agree with that. I think First off, Esperanto was the language I learned that gave me the ability to understand. I knew I could learn a language. So even though I haven't spoken in over 2 years, I'm forever indebted to what Esperanto did for me in terms of confidence. Um, I don't think Esperanto will ever take up because one, there's way too much negativity around it. Like the same people who trash Esperanto love Dothraki and stuff like that.
Right.
But it's just because Esperanto is not on a TV show,
Right.
every Sunday night, or
Yeah.
used to be. And I don't hate those people for that. I'm not one to be like, well, you don't like mine, so I'm not going to like yours.
No,
I
I
think
want to learn Token English, or not Token
yeah,
English, Token Elvish.
like Elvish, yeah,
Learn High Elvish.
yeah. But I agree with you. I think there eventually will be a language that kind of becomes the normal. I know that English right now is everywhere, but I don't think English will ultimately be because realistically, English is not a. I don't know how to say it. It's not really a good
No,
language.
just go ahead and say it. It's not a good language.
Um,
It's a mutt of languages. Yeah.
So, and I agree with you. I think Mandarin Chinese will eventually be. I think it'll take over in terms of because I know right now if you're into any business at all, obviously not if you're in America, but most other business trades, Japan, China, India, Korea, Vietnam, Russia, any of these places, it's you learn English if you're in the business field, in terms of higher up. But I do think ultimately Mandarin Chinese because there's more instead of having 80% of the world learn what 20% of the world speaks, why would you not have 40% of the world learn what the other 60% speaks?
Yeah. I also don't think. I don't think. Well, I thought of two comments. I don't think that it's realistic for a constructed language um, to be to take over all the other languages because and actually I don't even think that like Mandarin or English could ever like just push all the other languages away and
Yeah.
everybody only speaks English or Mandarin. There will always be other languages spoken.
Yeah.
People are stubbornly attached to their cultural identity, to their ancestry, and so even if China takes over the entire world and Mandarin is the lingua franca of every country on earth, you're still going to find pockets of people who are speaking English and Italian, and that's just kind of how linguistics works. But I don't think a constructed language could ever do that because then you're it. Well, I mean, it's easier to let people speak the language that's useful to them already, rather than saying, "Here's this new language that nobody speaks.
Mm-hmm.
Let's all learn it."
Yeah.
Some people are going to be like, "No, I don't want to do that."
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, and the biggest issue with Esperanto is as new things become available in order to get a word from where there's not a country that speaks it, right? I mean, like, and totally died. Okay. I even tried to send a comment that said my internet is freaking out, not realizing that I was on the internet and had to have the internet. All right. I think we're still showing the stream as buffering. Is it good? I think it's good now. Let me go.
I can see you.
Okay. All right. So I think we are. There it is. Okay. It is. I think. Good. Let me pop that back up. Sorry. No, it's still buffering. What is happening? My internet is being. I think we're all right. Reconnection successful. Let me open up my YouTube. See, it's still showing buffering in my live stream. Is the video working for you guys? It's like it works like ever so often. What is happening?
That darn virus.
Dude, it's honestly, I don't know if it's from where so many people are at home now, but my internet the past little bit has been terrible. I think. All right, it seems like it's. All right, I think we're going. I think it's.
All right.
I think it's going now. I think it was just maybe taking a second to get into it. Hopefully that doesn't happen again. So all right. So jumping back into this, I think the biggest problem with Esperanto is, and this is a problem that I ran into when I was active in the Esperanto community, and that is if a new concept or new idea comes around or something of that nature, from where it's not spoke as a main language basically anywhere. Basically, people have to, from what I understand, this is just from reading, and who knows how it is now, but this is just kind of the concept that I gathered from people several years ago, and that is that when a word comes up, they have to basically formulate how they want to say it, and then it actually has to go to, I mean, essentially what is considered the Congreso of Esperanto, in order to approve that word being added to the language.
Yeah.
And so just the very idea of that makes me think it's probably never ever going to be that. The other problem is, while I don't agree that Esperanto has no culture, I actually did a reaction video to Language Czar Connor, or whatever his name last name is, which I'm a fan of that guy. I'm not. This is not a negative thing towards him, but he made a video about how there was no culture in Esperanto, and I don't fully agree with that. But I do agree that it does lack other culturistic things that just natural languages have.
Right.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, any constructed language is going to have that problem because it's not as embedded into the psyche of the people that are using it. I mean, that's one of the things that I love learning languages for is that, you know, and it's something I use to motivate myself too when I get discouraged. Like, oh man, these verb conjugations are kicking my butt.
Oh yeah.
And then I remember like, no, there are millions of people that learn French or whatever language you're studying, and they learn it, you know, they learn it as kids without understanding the way grammar works or the way that any of this works. You know, I can learn this, and I give myself a little bit of credit because here I am trying to learn, you know, a second or third language, and this language is used to express all the complexity of human existence.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, I need to give myself a break because that's a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
But I think that connection to expressing all the complexity of human existence is something that constructed languages maybe have a hard time connecting to because nobody's speaking them, or very few people are speaking them, you know, every single day, all the time, like you do your native tongue or your second language, or your third language or your fifth language or whatever.
And realistically, from an Esperanto standpoint, I think that I know that there are some people who are a little over. There's bad seeds in every community, and I know that there's an elitism in. As a matter of fact, part of the reason I got out of Esperanto is because of a couple of individuals that were just a little too like. People would comment on their YouTube videos and they would almost make fun of them, and I'm like, dude, this is like, that's not like. People are here to learn about this, and your job and goal is to get more people into it, not make you think you're a douche. And so, you know, I kind of got out of it because of that. But I think that for the most part, Esperanto speakers, I would still consider myself an Esperanto speaker. That's probably giving myself way too much credit because, like I said, it's been over 2 years. But I'm sure if I dabbled just a little bit, even in Duolingo or something, it would kind of just, it would take a little bit, but it would come back. But I think that most are, you know, without the idea of it being a total takeover, like this is the national or international language, the fact that, well, the last time I checked, which was two and a half years ago, there was almost 3 million speakers of it, which is insane for a language that's not real.
Yeah. I think the big thing that you can think about when you think about language takeovers and a lingua franca for the whole world is that Rome tried to do this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they set themselves apart from other ancient cultures in that, like when the Assyrians would take you over, you know, you would send your pittance to Babylon, but they would let you keep your religion and your language. You're fine. We don't care about you. We just want your money.
Yeah.
But Rome didn't do that. They wanted everyone in the Roman Empire to speak Latin, and so they spread Latin around everywhere. But what happened was it morphed into local dialects, into vulgar Latin, and the academics in Rome would lament the death of Latin as people were speaking this vulgar Latin in the streets. But over time, that's how we got French and Spanish and Portuguese and Romanian. Is those were all the local dialects of Latin in that area. And so I think even if you did, if a government took over the whole world and said, okay, starting from today, everybody's learning English. No ifs, ands, or buts. If you don't want to learn English, you're going to be punished. Um, Over time, that English would morph into something different.
Yeah.
That's the lesson that we can learn from Rome spreading Latin around their world.
Yeah. No, I agree completely, because no matter what you tell people to speak, it's going to. I mean, look at English, British English, and United States English.
Or heck, even English in West Virginia.
Yeah, well, yeah, yeah. No, I mean, you go to, yeah, and even in the United States, like, we speak the same language, but there are definitely dialects and there are different words that people. I was looking up a thing not too long ago about just different slangs or not slangs, but different words people use. And I need to ask. Oh man, this is my Aaron from Fingtam tie-in for today. I need to ask him because he's from Wisconsin. It said that Wisconsin doesn't call a water fountain; they call it a bubbler.
That's interesting.
If I went to Wisconsin and I was like, "Where's the water fountain?" Which I'm sure they would understand that, but if somebody's like, "Oh, the bubbler's over there," I'd be like, "The what?"
Yeah.
Or even like the further north you get, it's flapjacks and not pancakes.
Right.
And then even then, like which I'm from Virginia, so it's like we're technically south, but we're also technically north. We're in a weird spot.
Right.
But like the further north you go, like even this isn't language related, but like if you say you want a sweet tea, they don't understand. Like,
No, yeah.
what
I worked as a semi truck driver for 2 years, and I learned that there's a like you can divide the U.S. by the Mason and Dixon line, but I think a more accurate one is the sweet tea line. And
yeah.
once you get like 20 miles into Ohio, it's no more sweet tea.
Yeah. No, it's super super crazy. So yeah, I think I'm glad that you all asked that question. That's a very I like talking about stuff like that specifically. Let me pop over to this Twitter because I remember just saying quirks of languages that just let me see. I've been thinking about 90 days with drops challenge. Let's talk about that.
Okay.
Which first and foremost, I think you challenged me to, or you were like, "Hey, do it," and I was like, "I'm going to do it," and then I didn't do it. Which I have a bad habit of doing. But what you did Norwegian, right?
Mm-hmm.
How would you say kind of that because that just ended, right? If I'm not mistaken, like
just like 2 days ago.
Yeah. So how would you rate what you learned from drops? I know that's hard to put in perspective because I'm sure you saw those words in other contexts just via studying and stuff. But how would you rate?
Actually, I really didn't because this year, I mean, aside from this whole virus stuff, this year has been crazy, and I'm really proud that I finished the 90 days of drops challenge without any missed days because life has been insane, and just like the fact that I was able to put 5 or 6 minutes in a day to do it every day was really impressive to me. So
yeah, no, for sure.
I did do some Norwegian on Duolingo here and there. I got a book called The Mystery of Nils for Christmas. It's a language learning book, but it's also a novel. So so the beginning of the book has like the first chapter is just like 3 sentences, and it's very very basic Norwegian. And then as you progress through the book, the language increases in complexity. So cool. I've been using that a little bit. Just the other day, I started talking to someone from Norway online and just kind of studying with a native speaker now. But aside from those few things, pretty much drops was the only language learning I was doing for the last 3 months. So when I started the 90 Days with Drops challenge, I had about 50 words on drops.
Mm-hmm.
When I stopped, I had 583.
Okay.
So and if you tested me on like, I mean, I'd probably have to have the little symbols that they use on drops too, but many of the words that I learned on drops, I could still recall it. I could still tell you what they meant if I saw them.
Mm-hmm.
But so like I know that the word for aspirin in Norwegian or painkillers is smertestillende, but ask me to say, "Ouch, my head hurts. Can you give me some aspirin?"
Right.
You know, I don't know how to do that yet. So drops uh, was is amazing for me at learning vocabulary.
Mm.
I I've I've tried in the past to use flashcards or just writing down new words that I see, and it doesn't really stick with me, but drops does.
Yeah.
Um, and if someone who's watching has never dealt with drops, there's a couple different exercises you do, but it all revolves around these very minimalistic symbols that you associate with the word. So a symbol will come out that has like someone waving, and then you have to say, "Oh, that's hello," and then it has like four words, and you choose which one says hello. And there are a couple different exercises that it does, and you just do it over and over again. It cycles through the exercises, and so it doesn't get dull. But you do it it sets for on the free version, it's a 5 minute timer, and you go through as many as you can in 5 minutes. If you do the premium one, you can do it for as long as you want, but um, so just doing that 5 or 6 minutes a day, my vocabulary in Norwegian like shot through the roof. I mean, that's what 50 words to 580 is more than 10 times the words that I knew when I started.
Yeah.
Um,
Especially
so
especially for 5 minutes a day. Keep in mind, like
right, and
that's
that was the big lesson for me. Like with drops, or if you find a vocabulary system that works for you, or even Duolingo, and it takes a couple minutes if you're focused. Um, just that little bit of study every day over time, if you make a habit of it, can have huge gains.
yeah.
So now that it's completed, I'm going back to Duolingo, and I'm going back to my Mystery of Nilo, and I'm taking a MOOC online from FutureLearn, um, and I'm focusing on learning all the connecting words and all the grammar so that I can take this 580 word grammar or vocabulary that I have and actually use it.
Yeah.
Um, but in terms of just like pure vocabulary, I like drops won me with this challenge. Like I'll go to bat for them.
Yeah.
It was
I
amazing.
I liked drops. Like I said, the only reason I deleted it is just because I had to make a full overhaul of my study. Basically, I've tried to take everything, and it sucked because I actually have a premium membership to drops. Like I have a year membership because I really did like them, and it had a lot. I mean, I like Lingo Deer. I like aspects of everything, but my main issue is from where 90% of my study was on my phone. That meant 90% of my study time I wasn't actually studying.
Right.
And
And when you tweeted or wherever I saw that you had deleted all your apps, and I watched your YouTube video about it, and I was like shocked. I was like, oh my gosh, like that's crazy. But then I thought about it, and I was like, I think I could probably do that, because I thought about, and I wrote a blog post about this, about like how my language strategy changed over time,
mhm.
and it's 100% connected to my level in the language. So when I started studying French, it was all Duolingo, and I needed that game aspect of it to keep myself motivated, and I'm still really new in Norwegian, and so that game aspect of the language learning, I need it because it's hard. But
Right.
when I finished the French tree, and a lot of it too with French was when I was doing French on Duolingo, they had that immersion part on Duolingo where you would translate Wikipedia articles
Mhm.
into the languages. I wish that they hadn't got rid of that, because that was amazing for me. Um, the Duolingo lessons coupled with that immersion thing, like I went from no very little French at all to when I finished. I had this shocking moment when I was just about done with the French tree, where I found myself like easily translating sentences from Voltaire into English from French, and I realized I was doing it, and I kind of sat back and was like, I'm translating Voltaire, and it's not hard. Like, what on earth is going on? So the end of the French tree, I was able to read Voltaire, but as I finished the tree and I kept going in French, I noticed my gains decreased and decreased, and so at some point I made kind of a paradigm shift from the heavily game influenced language learning to more advanced things, reading books, speaking to my native speaking friend, listening to French news, reading French news websites, watching French TV, watching, French movies and stuff like that. And so once I get to a certain level, I find that it flips,
Hmm.
and I no longer want the game aspect. I want to learn in a more advanced way. And so after I thought about that, I was like, oh, what Seabolt did wasn't all that crazy, because
Right.
he just needs a more advanced way to learn at this point.
Yeah.
Um, so I suspect the same thing will happen with Norwegian, but we'll see. I'm still not
Yeah.
good enough to do that yet.
Also, sorry for looking around. My phone lit up, and I try to keep it just in case, like, my wife needs anything. And somebody was telling me that Soul was telling me that my live chat wasn't working. So we actually have some questions here, but from where my stream kind of crapped out for a second, I had to
So,
refresh the actual stream page so the comments would come through.
yeah, no worries.
So that's so I was like looking over here, and then now all of a sudden that they're all popping through. So, um, yeah, with the stuff, and guys, we're gonna get to that, those questions and stuff. Thank you for um, adding those. Sorry that I didn't see them earlier, and thank you, Soul, for reaching out on Discord and telling me. Um, the biggest thing for me is, I think, and again, I don't want it to sound like I'm anti gamification and stuff, because whatever works for you works for you. I just think that in terms of the language that I'm studying or going to study or try to study, whatever, I'm past a point where that helps. Like, I'm. This is gonna sound insane. Like, I don't mean this the way that it sounds. I'm better than the gamification can teach me to be. The only way that I can advance is forcing myself to get in front of native content. Because even earlier today, I watched a show. I've immersed 40 hours. Wow, how did I immerse 40 hours in a day? I immersed 40 minutes, and I can probably understand 3 to 5%. It's not much, but there's enough to where context. There are some sentences that I fully get. Um, and like I said, so that was mainly what it was for me. But and yeah, I mean, who knows? With Norwegian, you may run into that. Norwegian, I have a soft spot for Norwegian. I really want to learn it at some point, but
It's
that
really easy.
I know that there's
It's so
no
easy. Like I always heard that Norwegian was like one of the hardest languages to learn, and there are difficult aspects about it because there's no standard spoken Norwegian, and there are two or more standard written Norwegians.
right.
So the native speaking thing can be tricky depending on where they're from, but as far as like the dry grammar and the vocabulary and the sentence structure, it's really easy and it's really fun.
Yeah.
For instance, it's just a quick for instance. Um, in Norwegian, when you're asking a question, you invert the you ask so if you were to say do you have a dog, right, in English. In Norwegian, if you translated the question literally, it would be have you a dog.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like so I skipped a step because I'm not quite to the point where I'm thinking in Norwegian. I have to translate it from English into Norwegian, but I've skipped a step by thinking about the question as if it were a Shakespearean play. So if I'm trying to ask a question in Norwegian, I think have you a dog?
Right.
And then it goes into Norwegian, and it's like, oh, I got it now.
Yeah.
So there, because of the connections between English and Norwegian and Old Norse, like it's like French is much more alien than Norwegian is for an English speaker.
Yeah. All right, I'm gonna jump into a couple of these questions just to get them done. What are your opinions on raising children bilingual?
I try and teach my daughter as much French as I can, and just this morning we were watching a Norwegian children's show called Fentragen,
Hmm?
which is she loves it because the characters are cute, and I love it because I can understand almost everything they're saying.
Right.
So my Norwegian is slightly less than a 2 or 3 year old in Norway, but um, I I wish that my daughter were bilingual.
Mm-hmm.
She's not. I mean, well, she's turning out kind of like me. She knows some French and she knows some Spanish, and she makes up her own little languages.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I think that raising children to be bilingual, if you can do it, is wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
I think that studies show that bilingual children are more flexible in school, and they're more. I guess I won't be that specific. Studies I think have shown that for a child to be bilingual is an advantage cognitively. Um, but I also feel, and I think this is one of the big lessons of parenthood, is that you you never know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that you should try and force it.
Sure.
If you're speaking French or Spanish to your kiddo when they're really young, they're going to pick it up, and if you keep that up, they're going to learn it, and it's fine. Um, Being a parent is a whole lot of making crap up, and so
Yep.
you can never, you can say all the things like, "Oh, I'm going to raise my daughter to be bilingual in English and French," but will that really happen? Who knows? So
Yeah.
I guess my answer is I think it's wonderful to try,
Yeah.
but life happens.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that I would say is if you are going to do it, make sure you actually know the language. And I'm not talking like I know it. I can kind of like make sure you know it, because if they grow to be truly bilingual, and I mean just understanding some of the stuff that you say, but it's wrong, that's not going to be good.
Right. And I think for me that's the reason that I don't try and have my daughter be bilingual, because I'll speak as much French to her as I can think of, but there are times when I'm like, when I want to tell her some random thing, come and play with this ball, and then I'm like, I forgot how to say that in French, and so I'm not going to sit there and think, hold on, little daughter of mine, while I look at a dictionary and look up this word I forgot.
Yeah.
So you just have to move on with life, and so I think that because I'm not competent enough in the language to just throw out the sentences that I need to tell my daughter in French all the time, I don't try and force it on her. I guess.
But the good thing is if you're doing it just a little bit, it could be enough to intrigue them to want to learn. And that's the other thing that I agree with you on is I'm not gonna, like, when my son's 3 as well. And so if he gets to the point, like right now, this is not any influence of me. He started watching like Ni Hao Kai Lan and and he loves Dora the Explorer. So and he'll say some of those words. He says Ni Hao all the time. And so if it's something that he wants to do, I'm fine. But if he's like, Dad, I literally never ever want to study another language, it's no different than if he would say, I don't want to play football or basketball, or you know what I mean? Like
right.
I'm not going to force a hobby on him.
Yeah.
So, if I may ask, okay, so somebody just joined your stream. Who's the guy that you're speaking with? This is Tongue Tied Blog. This is a bunch of the lesson in that is that you don't even speak your native language perfectly.
Right. Exactly.
Does language blogging and stuff, and which I will link in the description because it is not Lang Depot. I did love my conversation with Lang Depot, but thankfully I changed that. But yes, you can get drops words online. They have a dictionary, and then you can put them into Anki. Interesting. I do love Anki, but if I was going to do that, I would just use drops, I think. Alan Cruz. Hey, Seabolt, so what language might you focus on or look into following with your new plan? I will touch on that in a later video. I've kind of got a series of videos kind of just transitioning into what I'm doing. So we'll get to that. But if you've ever followed this channel, you probably could guess it if you really, really had to. Nice picture, smiley face. Okay. But yeah, oh man. So the So yeah, I'm not going to force him into anything or anything like that. And in terms of even going back to this study plan, yeah, I think um, that 200 word limit is what. Oh, for if you have a like a multi part question, just like type multiple
I
whatever.
have the
It's
same problem. Like when I was in college, like write this essay 200 words, and I'm like, okay, no problem. I write it, and I'm like 2,000 words, right? No 200. Oh man.
yeah.
And Twitter is hard for me, man. 140 characters. That's rough.
Yeah, Twitter can be rough. Does drop? Oh, he say okay. This person's saying it's free drops. Doesn't it cost money? No, you can use drops for free. You can use it 5 minutes a day.
Yeah, it's actually 10 minutes a day. It's 5 minutes every 10 hours.
Okay, yeah,
So
yeah,
if you do it in the morning, and then you can do it in the evening after work.
yeah.
If I would have, this is the thing that drives me nuts, in a good way. I did an average of 5 or 6 minutes a day of drops.
Mm.
If I had been able to do 10 minutes a day, would that have doubled the number of words that I know? Would I know 1,000 words in Norwegian instead of 500? Like,
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah.
So,
Well, and honestly, I mean, I know that. Yeah, I mean, I have, even though it's now just sitting by the wayside now because I don't have the apps on my phone anymore. But I think 5 minutes is good, and or the 10, twice. You wake up in the morning and do it before you go to bed, whatever. I think that's good because I really think, and this is part of why I'm changing my study habit. I honestly think people focus too much on vocabulary to an extent.
yeah.
If you have 2 hours to study, I don't think you should spend an hour and a half on vocab.
No, no. Use the
So
language.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
When I was studying French, like I've never really focused on French vocabulary. Sometimes, like my friend and I will work on vocabulary. Like when we traveled in Ireland together for 3 months a couple of years ago, she came up from Paris and met us in Dublin, and all through our trip through Ireland, she would say, what do you call that in French? What's that in French? What's that in French? And so, there are times when I've worked really hard on French vocabulary, but it's much more, I feel, it's much more valuable to spend your time using the language because you will learn vocabulary when you're using it because you're going to look at something and say, wow, look at that cool thing, but I don't know what to call that. And you're going to say, qu'est-ce que c'est en français? And then they're going to tell you, and then bam, you learned a new word. You might have to write it down or make a note of it to remember it, but I think it's much better to use the language than to just sit there and study dry vocabulary.
well, and I know that a lot of people think that I'm like just this shill for Matt versus Japan, but even if you go around him and if you look up on YouTube people who are 3 months into, and it doesn't have to be Japanese, it can be any language. If you look up people who use that immersion approach, which doesn't mean, I think a lot of people think it means that you don't ever look up vocabulary and stuff. It does. It's just you're spending more time with the language than with studying.
Yeah.
And
I think
advance.
it's much more important. It's much more important to be able to access new information in your target language than to know 50,000 words.
Mm-hmm.
To be able to say, what do you call that, is a much better skill than to know what it's called without knowing how to use it.
Yeah. No, I agree. And then that's the thing. There are so many words that you can learn that are useless. I mean, there's words that
English is, what does sesquipedalian mean?
Yeah. Well,
I think it's a 7-syllable word.
When I was talking to Michael from Polyglot Files, I was talking about I'd never heard the word pragmatic until I started dating my wife. Never in my history had I heard that word. That's pragmatic.
It's a fancy word for practical.
Yeah, and
I was going to comment on that. I was there when you said that, and I was like, had my fingers on the keyboard. I was like, it's practical. It's practical. I know.
Yeah, I'd never heard it, but again, with me, and ultimately, I think part of what I need to do is start trying to speak other languages. I feel like sometimes in other languages, I try to be more articulate than how it would be. And I know that you definitely speak languages differently. You don't speak it the same, but like, I will try to use words and phrases and like a general sentence structure that I would not naturally use in English. It's really weird, and that's something I'm trying to work on as well.
Yeah, and I think that maybe it's just we as humans, but definitely like as an American learning other languages, you want to appear skilled
Mm-hmm.
and well versed in your language when you speak it to a native speaker. And so, sometimes it'd be like if you were in a deli and someone that wasn't from America came up to the counter and said, "Pardon me, but does it happen that you have this?" And using like Jane Austen English when they could
Right.
just go up and say, "Can I have that?"
Yeah.
It's it's I think it's important to keep in mind what the goal of language is, and that's to communicate wants and needs.
Yeah.
And so, one thing that I love Rick Steves' travel books, and he's a self-admitted monoglot, but he says that if you can communicate your needs, you've done it right. And one word that you could use in just about any country in the world is, okay. Don't use that symbol everywhere.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Um, but if you can point to someone or to something and say that one or grunt, and you've communicated your needs. You don't always have to, say, yes, I'll have the one on the left with pink sparkles and
Right.
whatever.
Yeah, because even if you really break it down, let's say there were multiple. We'll use donuts for example. With if you said you were just like and they pointed to this one, you could be like I'm sure. Of course, not all the same because in Greek, ne is yes. So I'm sure if you were in Greece and you were like ne, they'd be like okay. But I'm sure
Right.
just general, you know, you can communicate that idea no, and then they would move to the next one.
Yeah.
Um, so that's a good point. But I do love learning the language. I want
Oh
to
yeah.
definitely want to speak it, and I'm hoping. I mean, this year I had plans of going to Italy and Japan,
Mm.
and that's totally not happening now. So
No, but now's a good time to buy tickets for like a year from now.
that's true too. I should do
Yeah.
that honestly. Just go
Yeah.
ahead and have them out of the way because that was the thing. Like I was gonna study Italian for
Mm.
going there because that's the thing like I told my wife which I mentioned this in a video but for anybody here who doesn't follow my channel or anything or if you stumble across it or whatever but I told my wife I was like I'll go anywhere in the world that you want to you just have to give me a solid amount of time to at least learn a little bit of the language
Right.
and then
Even if you have no interest in language, just learn please, thank you, and you're welcome. Like,
yeah
that's and hello. Yeah.
yeah just a
Just
couple
those 5 words will get you so far in any country that you go
yeah
to.
and I know that and that's this is a topic that I've never understood because there's so many different ways of saying good evening goodbye hello like there's so many ways of saying that and I know in particular a lot of people who speak or learn Japanese if you say konnichiwa there's kind of this elitist mentality sometimes, not all the time, but again, every language has their bad seeds, and they'll be like, "Well, konnichiwa is just for this. It's actually konbanwa." And I'm like, if I went to Japan right now and said konnichiwa, and it was 2 o'clock in the morning, they would know that I'm from America, and they would understand that I'm just trying to be polite. So chill out, bro.
Yeah. One time, my friend from Paris was here visiting us, and we were getting ready to go to bed, and so I told her bonne nuit, and she kind of chuckled, and she said, "I know what you mean, but actually we only say that to children." So I
Whoa.
was like, "Okay, well you got my
Right.
you got my meaning," but yeah, like and it's like think about if someone came up to you on the street and said, "How do you do?"
Mm-hmm.
It, you know, it seems weird when you could just say hi.
So yeah,
How's it going? What's up?
yeah,
Um,
and that is why native content is important
right,
to get the little nuances of how they actually speak.
right, and to get the slang words that are now something dirty, like there are a couple different French words for kiss, but one of them you should never use because it doesn't mean kiss anymore.
Whoa.
So
How
so yeah, those are the fun things about learning languages when you open your mouth and accidentally stick your foot in and don't realize it until 5 minutes later when your native friend is like, so about that.
Yeah,
You may have
well,
noticed everybody was laughing at you.
there's a story that I was talking to Luke Truman, not for my channel, and this was actually I think before he did an interview with me on his channel, and I think this was before we went live. But he said that he was trying to speak one time. I can't remember if he said he was saying that he wanted something or something, but anyway, the word drastically changes depending on the pitch. And I'm just going to use obviously an example. We're going to say it's the word for apple. I don't think that's what it was, but apparently instead of having like a falling tone, if you use it with a rising tone, means we'll say the parts of the female anatomy.
Right.
And I was because he said that his friend that he was with started laughing and he was like, "What?" And they're like, "That's not the tone that you want to use." And he was like, "What?"
Yeah.
So
I also love when languages have words that sound similar to English words but mean something different. Like,
oh yeah,
this guy that I met in Idaho, he lived in Brazil for a little while, and he told me this time that he had a brand new missionary who was fresh off the boat, didn't speak barely any Portuguese, and so the first thing he did is he took him on the most crowded bus in Rio de Janeiro he could find. And then as they're riding the bus, they're like apart from each other because there are so many people. And he says, "Hey, do you remember what's the word in English for when you get your money for the week?" And this other guy says, "Oh, that's payday." But apparently in Portuguese, payday means I farted. And so like everybody like moves away from him and is all embarrassed. And,
nice.
yeah.
That's yeah. It is funny, man. That's uh, so many languages do that, like where words will be kind of the false. What is it called?
False friends.
False friends.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just like Spanish in particular has a lot of those, but then they have ones that are real. It's hard to actually determine. Like the one that in Spanish that always got me is actualmente doesn't mean actually; it means currently.
I think it's
that's
the
what it
same
is.
in French.
Or
Yeah,
actualmente.
I think it's the same in French. People can correct us if we're wrong,
Yeah.
but I love in French. One of the things that I found really cool and easy was that all the what do they call those words? All the adverbs, like actually, simply, yeah, adverbs.
Yeah.
All those adverbs are like exactly the same as English, just with a different ending. Instead of ly, they have ment.
Yep.
And
That's
so,
Spanish.
like, I
Yeah.
immediately just started like when I would write French or I'd speak French, I'd use as many adverbs as I could because I knew them all. Like, oh, I know that word. I know that word. There,
Yep.
adverbs for everybody.
Yep.
And yeah.
Yeah. It's
But actually, I think that just got me thinking that the next language that I want to learn after I have a solid foundation in Norwegian, the next language I want to learn is Hungarian.
okay.
Because I learned a couple months ago on the Lang Focus channel with Paul. Amazing channel. It's huge. It's great.
Yeah, it is.
I learned, and I didn't know this, that Hungarian is not an Indo-European language. It's a Uralic language like Finnish and Estonian, and so it has. So I realized that I had never really studied or wanted to study a non-Indo-European language except for Japanese.
Yeah.
And so I want to learn Hungarian simply because it's not an Indo-European language, and so there are going to be some things in it that are just crazy and completely weird to my brain. But I think it'll be a really cool exercise, and I've learned a little bit about it, like they have this thing called vowel resonance, where if you say a sentence, depending on the context of the sentence and some of the grammar, the actual vowels in certain words have to change to match the other words.
Whoa.
Which sounds really cool to me. And they have a lot of endings, and I've never really studied a language that had endings.
Yeah.
That changed the word, but
yeah. It's it seems like I've never I think I may have dabbled in like not like a general sense of how I usually dabble, but like I literally mean dabble in Hungarian, where I fired up the Duolingo course and maybe did a topic or two just to see, because I am very intrigued by other languages.
Yeah.
But I don't know much about I don't know much about any like Hungarian, Turkish, any of that kind of like almost like Middle Eastern, but not like
Yeah.
so it's
Yeah. Well, okay. Here's a question for you that I thought about. How do you feel about, um, and maybe this is like, the reason I'm thinking about this is because as we were talking about Hungarian, I thought that I don't have any connection to Hungary at all.
mm-hmm.
Like I've never Hungary. Like all respect to any Hungarians that are listening, aside from paprika, I have no idea what comes from your country, and so. And usually the languages that I want to study are languages that I have some personal investment in, even if it's just interest. Like
Mm-hmm.
French, I'd always been interested in French because French, you know, Irish I got interested in because I went to Ireland.
Mm-hmm.
Norwegian I'm interested in for a couple reasons. My ancestors come from Norway, but also I want to learn Old Norse.
Mm-hmm.
And Norwegian, well, Icelandic is closer to Old Norse, but Norwegian has more resources for learning.
Right.
So I just pushed a button. What did I do? Okay.
Oh.
But Hungarian, I don't, and Japanese, you know, I want to study Japanese, which I haven't yet. I've studied hiragana a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
My brother took like all kinds of Japanese in school and stuff, but I've studied a little bit of hiragana and katakana, and I know some Japanese from samurai movies.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, I would love to learn Japanese for the same reasons that any American does, so that I can watch Japanese movies without subtitles, so that I could read the comics, so that I could read, you know, what's that? Oh, his name just. There's a big fat novel that's about a samurai that is really famous, but you know, that's why I want to learn Norwegian. But Hungarian, I want to learn out of just pure intellectual curiosity. I have
Mm-hmm.
no connection to the culture or to the country or anything. How do you feel about like uh, why do you study certain languages?
Yeah. I think if you have an interest in it, in my opinion, that's enough to study it. I could probably tell you exactly the reasons I've studied everything that I have. Um, in terms of languages that I've studied extensively, um, Spanish was because I had to, being an American, which that mentality has changed drastically.
And I have always pushed hard away from that mentality. When people are like, "Oh, you should study Spanish because it's useful," that's like a hard no for me.
Yeah.
But then when I'm on my own thinking about it, I was like, I should learn Spanish. That would
Yeah.
have been useful to know Spanish. But
Yeah. And that's, you know, that's kind of the thing. Like, I wish I had the mentality about languages now. I wish I had that mentality when I was in high school, and I only took a year of Spanish because I failed miserably because I hated it, you know, because it was a forced thing. But, you know, I mean, you know, but that's why I studied Spanish. And then obviously I've become better as I didn't care. Japanese is because of the culture. It's so exotic. It's so foreign. It's the complete polar opposite of English in terms of the language and the culture. And just, I mean, you know, you see the kimonos and the, you know, all that crazy stuff. And obviously, you're not going to go to Tokyo and just, you know, somebody's working at McDonald's with a giant kimono on. Like, but you know what I mean? Like, you see all this stuff, and it's just so foreign. Plus, you know, the idea of a writing system that isn't the alphabet I'm used to is very, very intriguing to me. Esperanto I studied specifically because I had given up on languages and everybody said it was super easy, and it was kind of my last hoorah into, well, hopefully I can learn something, or if not, maybe I need to give up, which worked incredibly. So that's, again, my connection to Esperanto. Mandarin Chinese is because that was, you know, as I started kind of shifting my goals, I knew that I could speak a lot around here. I mean, there's Chinese people. I don't care how small your town is. If you said that there's no Chinese people there at all, I would have a hard time believing it. I know that that's probably the case somewhere, but I mean, you know. But then that was before I realized that most people that migrated from China were Cantonese, just
Ah,
based on the area. You know, you hear Mandarin and you're just like, all right.
man, yeah.
I would count. I'm not going to count Greek because I'm about 4 weeks into Greek right now, which is not the main. By the way, anybody watch Alan? That's not the language I'm talking about with my new study methods. Like that's not the language I'm going hard on. I'm going with Greek, like because of making kind of a commitment to Link in terms of doing that. Russian, I studied to a point of knowing about 500 to 600 words. I used it specifically on Link, and that was from I got into a phase where well, first off, I love Slavic languages. I think they sound incredible. I love kind of the guttural. I don't know. There's just some oomph behind Slavic languages. Polish.
I kind of like the idea in Russian of how there's like micro syllables. Like when I took Russian in college, the teacher said that like one of the hardest words for English speakers to say is one that you use all the time because there are like micro syllables within the word that
Mm-hmm.
English speakers don't get, and that's the straspuche. And they're
Здравствуйте.
like
Yeah.
they're like three little syllables in there that we always miss because we're not thinking about like micro syllables within the syllables.
Yeah, and then you try to read Здравствуйте. Like I eventually got to the point where I just recognized the word as a whole, and
Right.
I was just like, okay, I saw the one symbol at the beginning, and then the symbol in the middle, and I was like, all right, that's Здравствуйте. Like, and I still
Yeah.
probably butcher that. Yeah, it's cool. Greek has some weird symbols or some weird pronunciation too. Like they have a lot of that kind of almost like what I would say would be like a Yiddish in stuff.
Yeah.
So echo, like I have echo, like there's like a weird like throaty kind of
Hmm.
sound. It's really weird. I loved Russian though, and I got into a phase where I wanted to read a lot, and I know that Russian or the Russian language is just littered with just tons of literature and stuff like that. So
Hmm.
that's kind of why I studied that. French, I wouldn't say I studied extensively, but I did get up to I think like 600 known words on Link, and that was over the course of about a 3 or 4 week period. A lot of that knowledge came previously from Spanish. There was a lot of kind
Yeah.
of duplicate sounds and things of that nature. But other than that, that was kind of a weird way of saying. I think if you have interest in something, you should do it. Or in
Yeah.
terms of languages, like I don't think. I don't think you have to have a connection somewhere or anything like that. I mean, it could probably make it a little bit easier, but I think that if you, for example, if you had interest in Hungarian, but you were like, no, but it's more useful to learn Punjabi, you're you're not going to do as well at Punjabi because you're going to be like, man, I really want to study Hungarian. So I think
Yeah.
ultimately, if you have an interest there,
And I
I
think
think it's
actually
fine.
looking forward at the languages that I want to learn, I think that my need for having some kind of cultural or emotional investment in that language is shifting
Hmm.
because I want to learn Hungarian because it's not an Indo-European language. That is like that's a that's a cognitive reason. That's not like an emotional reason.
Hmm.
I want to learn Latin. I want to learn Old Norse because well, I have so the one thing that I will probably be like a snob about one day is like, oh, yes, I've read the Poetic Edda in the original language, and
Right.
like that's something that I like. Not that I like want to do, but I want to do it. To be able to say like, oh, have you read Dante's Inferno in Italian? I have. It's
Right.
like that's my one like what do they call that? Like my snobbery is to be able to read great literature in the languages that they were meant to be read in, because like, well, I mean, I've gone the other way. I've read part of Lord of the Rings in French,
Hmm.
and because I bought the whole trilogy at a bookseller in Paris for like €5. I thought it was a great deal, but it's hard to read in French. I mean, it's easy to read in French because it's a story I know. Same thing with Harry Potter,
Mm-hmm.
but it's it doesn't have, and maybe it's because I'm not a native speaker and I don't pick up on all the nuances of the language that the literature has. But like particularly with Lord of the Rings, there's so much meat in that story
Right.
that I don't get when I'm reading it in French. I will say that I think that Harry Potter is an amazing language learning tool because it's published in like 75 languages, and I
Mm-hmm.
want it in every language I ever learn.
Yeah.
Um, Especially because it's a story that you know, and so you have landmarks that you, if you get lost, you can say, "Oh, here's this chapter. I know what happens in this chapter."
Yeah.
So
And it grows
I
with
think
the audience.
right, right,
Yeah.
yeah, it gets really dark. Um, but like I've read part of L'Étranger by Camus, and that's really boring. And I've learned that like when I read the literature of the language, it's sometimes a double-edged sword.
Mm-hmm.
So like one of my proudest accomplishments as a language learner is that I sat down when I was in Ireland. I bought this book that was stories told by Peg Sayers, and she's a woman who lived on the Blasket Islands in Ireland, and she only spoke a very little bit of English. Her English wasn't very good. She was pretty much a monoglot with Irish, and so this book is bilingual. It's written in English and then in Irish, and all of her stories are, you know, dictated from her mouth.
Mm-hmm.
And so I sat down and I decided I'm going to translate this story into English, even though they've already done it in the beginning of the book. I'm going to do it because I want to understand what exactly she's saying. And so I went through and I over like 2 hours, I translated like two paragraphs of this story. And the words, like thinking back to it, the words that she was saying were amazingly rich and diverse, and they had all of the idiomatic, diversity that English does, but in Irish. Like there was one sentence I remember translating and then being like, "What on earth is she saying?"
Mm-hmm.
She said the literal translation was, "Nobody was home but the crows." And so, in the context of what she was saying, I had to take a minute and say, like, okay, is she talking like literally? There was nobody at the house except crows, or is it a metaphor or an idiom saying that nobody was home?
Right.
And so I posted my translation onto an Irish group on Facebook and said, here's what I'm translating. Here's what I said it meant. Can someone give me some insight about what this specific sentence meant? And the overwhelming response that I got was, A, you're really brave for trying to read Peg Sayers when you've only been studying Irish for a few months. And B, why are you reading Peg Sayers when you've only been studying Irish for a couple months? And so the first answer that I got flattered me, like, oh, I'm doing something ambitious. The second answer depressed me because I was like, that's not my question. Like,
Right.
Yes, it's ambitious. Yes, I probably shouldn't be reading this because it's super hard, but I'm trying to challenge myself,
Right.
and so, but it's still like to this day, that's still one of my proud accomplishments that I translated two paragraphs of Peg Sayers and mostly understood it.
Yeah. No,
So
that's the thing. There's a lot of literature in. There's books in English. Well, I'll give you an example, and then we do have two questions. I do want to answer those real quick before we go. But I start, and this is again everybody's reading level. I'm not an idiot. Like I can read. You know what I mean? Like I read all the time, but like there's certain things that if they're worded a certain way, I don't understand. So. I'm a huge Wizard of Oz fan. Love it. I've read the first book. I actually have the first 4 or 5 on my Kindle. I just haven't got into them, but I have read like the original Wizard of Oz story.
mm-hmm.
And again, I've seen the movie 200 million times. Like I love that movie. So I bought Wicked, and I just don't know what. Like I was just like. I mean, there's words on the page, but am I supposed supposed to
Yeah.
not understand what's going on? I don't really know.
There's I think definitely like, and you can apply this to all. I mean, I've never read Wicked, so I don't know what exactly that's like, but I know just, I mean, from writing my own fiction and from reading, as a kid, I was always having a book in my face. But there's literature and then there's literature, and
Mm-hmm.
the way that I think about it, like with art, is like there's art and then there's art, damn it.
Mm-hmm.
And art is like, oh, look at that, it's art. And art, damn it, is where you're standing there and you're going, I don't understand why this is happening, and the artist says it's art, damn it. And
Yeah.
and the same thing happens with literature. There's literature, and you're going through it. You're reading Harry Potter, or you're reading even like Pride and Prejudice. It's kind of like, it's literature.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's like, Crime and Punishment, and An Old Man in the Sea, and like reading that stuff is like heavy, and it's like, it's not something you read because it's fun. It's something you read because it's saying something important about the culture. But
Right.
but yeah, I definitely know what you mean. And yeah, and definitely like reading the literature of a culture in its language, um, can definitely be like that, where you're just like, I don't even know what's going on here. I would love, like, one of the things that I would love to do is to one day be able to read Le Man of La Mancha in Spanish. I think that would be really cool. Um, but
Yeah.
yeah.
No, it's I get where you're coming from for sure. All right, I'm gonna answer these two questions. Soul says, "Hey guys, what do you think of quality? Uh, I'm assuming the slash is quality versus quantity with language learning, as in depth sentence structure and grammar over word repetition."
Uh, I don't think those two are mutually exclusive. I think you can you can learn. Well, I will say it also depends on what level you're at.
Yeah.
At the start, I think that there. I think, okay. Got to adjust myself here. So, I think that language learning has different phases,
Mm-hmm.
and when you start, you're trying to lay a foundation that you can build everything up on. And so when you start learning a language, you need to learn the basic grammar, the sentence structure. I don't worry at all about vocabulary when I start learning a language. I just want to learn the skeleton of it.
Mm-hmm.
Once I have the skeleton, then I start learning vocabulary about. I try and focus on topics that I'm interested in talking about. I start with introductions. How do I say, my name is, what's your name, here's where I'm from, here's what I do for work, survival phrases, and then I start branching out from that.
Mm-hmm.
The point in French where I felt like where I really needed to focus on some specific grammar was when I started wanting to talk about how I was feeling.
Mm-hmm.
When you start talking about emotions, that's a complex thing to do even in English, and there are typically developing, fully functional adults that have no idea how to talk about how they're feeling. So
Right.
to do it in a foreign language is really tough. And when I started studying that is when I felt like I was starting to add maybe non-survival language to my repertoire of French. So I guess to pull back to what the question is, at the start I would focus on the grammar and the sentence structure. Don't worry too much about vocabulary. And then once you have that, then you can start learning vocabulary. And with vocabulary, I think that repetition is important
Mm-hmm.
because you're not going to remember a word the first time you hear it,
Right.
generally. Um, so yeah, I think I've lost track of where I'm going with that. But
Yeah. Well, I agree. I think you do need structure of the language. I do think that you can over bombard yourself with grammar in the beginning, but I think if you're going about it in when I started learning Japanese, I started with 3-word sentences. just because I knew the grammar was so crazy. I eventually learned the grammar was so crazy. Like I did a little bit of Rosetta Stone for it back in 2009, but like once I actually started trying to learn like outside of like that, I knew that with it being a subject object verb language, I would literally start with I eat apples, right?
Right.
Which I understood was I, and that's where I got used to using wa as a particle, and then Ringo tabimasu, right? Apple eat, I apple eat, because it's easier to digest.
Right.
And then once I kind of had the idea for how a 3-word to be sentence would work, anything using to be, I am, or something like that, or of course tabimasu would be to eat, and then nomimasu would be, would be to drink. So I could then switch to, watashi wa mizu o nomimasu, right? Like, and I would just slowly break that, and then I would, because those are the most basic, and then I would kind of branch out from there.
Right, and I think what you were saying about like when I'm focusing on vocabulary, I'm never just focusing on vocabulary, because when I learn some new vocabulary, I spend some time in my head trying to use it. So, when especially like with Duolingo and other like language learning stuff like that, they're going to give you vocabulary based on a topic. And so at some point in Duolingo, you will have learned like question words.
Mm-hmm.
So now you're learning vocabulary about, about recreation.
Right.
So now you need to practice in your head how to say, what's this game? Where's the ball?
Mm-hmm.
How many balls do you have? How many skis do you have? And so just never just be vocabulary for vocabulary's sake. Make it useful to you. Have dialogues in your head about how to use the vocabulary. Take a sentence that and then pop out one word and put another in, and then try and say it and see if it sounds right. And try and conjugate it different ways. How do I say this in the past tense? How do I say this in the future tense? And so, for me, like vocabulary is always a means to an end. It's never the thing.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and they go hand in hand because, for example, I'm solely using Japanese because of how different the grammar is versus English. But in Japanese, let's say you learn the word to eat, let's say you learn the word for I, and let's say you learn the word for apple. Well, if you would say, okay, so I is watashi, and then you may not even know the particles at that point, but if you said watashi tabemas ringo, that is just not even a coherent anything. Like you could get the idea of, okay, so but it's not, because correct grammar would be dropping I completely because it's just understood, and you would just say ringo tabemas. Or I think slang, or not slang, but like kind of casual speak would be ringo taberu, which is just like using the infinitive form or the dictionary form. So it's like you have to have that grammar. And then in terms of, like you said, vocabulary, one of the things that really started getting me to step away and really wanting to get rid of these applications was I was listening to a Q&A with somebody, and they were talking about how in Duolingo or other languages, they were like, you have an entire segment on animals. And outside of just learning how to say those animals, like how often do you talk about crabs or rabbits or anything like that in your daily life? Not often.
All the time, I do.
Do you?
I do all the time because I try and talk to my daughter in French. So for me,
well, fair enough. Okay, that makes sense.
Incorporating my daughter into my learning is good for me too, because it allows me to use some of those lessons that I normally wouldn't use. I mean, I'm not going to go up to an adult and say, "Do you see the cow?"
Right.
But I could go to my 3-year-old daughter and say, "You see the cow?" And if I do it in French, nowadays she'll ask me, now say that in Norwegian. And so it. I mean, having a kid is a good language learning.
Sure. So, I guess the counter argument to that would be it gives you plug and play pieces to practice sentences, so it's not the same word every time. I guess that would be the counter argument for it.
And I mean, and you never know. You might go, if you're going to go to the countryside in France, you might need to learn how to say
No,
cow in French because now there's a cow in the middle of the road and nobody
yeah,
speaks English.
that's true too. All right, Emily Castellanos says, "Do you think it is better to study with a spaced repetition system or just reading, like Steve Kaufman says?" I think
A really technical question.
I think I think it depends on what you're doing. I think if you okay, so I think it depends. If you are reading all the time anyway, like let's say that's your main source of learning and getting input, I don't think you have to worry about an SRS because you're going to naturally see those words in a spaced system anyway as you read. I think if you aren't reading or immersing in any way, shape, or form, if you're immersing at all, if you're watching videos, movies, whatever, or you're reading, I don't think you have to worry about it too much outside of, unless it's a word that you're struggling with or if it's a word that really just grabs you and you're like, I have to absolutely know this. But if you're reading or immersing, you're going to see that content. Because the thing is, if the word's not important and you forget it, you're not seeing it enough anyway. So I don't know, but I also, I mean, I currently use Anki every day, so I'm also I'm also, but again, it's because I pull words out as, which I've only been doing this kind of approach versus the application approach for a couple of days, but as I'm watching something, if I, for example, I'm watching a show on Netflix and like there was a word I heard probably about 4 or 5 times within the first 10 minutes of the show, and I was like, okay, I need to put this word into Anki. You know what? Like,
Yeah.
that's my take on it.
I think for me, the thing that spaced repetition does for me is it builds my instincts. When someone comes up to you and says "Parlez-vous français," you don't want to have that moment where you're like, "Hold on,"
Yeah.
And so I think spaced repetition, um, it helps to build your instincts so that when someone says "Parlez-vous français," you say "Oui, je parle un peu de français."
Yeah.
And I don't know that you necessarily get that from straight reading.
Yeah.
Especially, I would also say I think it depends on the language because I could read like I said I could read Voltaire when I was done with Duolingo in French.
Mm-hmm.
But if someone came up to me and started speaking French, I would have no idea what they were saying or how to respond.
Right.
Because reading French and speaking French are two very different things.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably a little bit true for every language simply because we don't speak like we write.
Yeah.
And I write fiction as another hobby. I have too many hobbies, but
Same.
I write fiction. I write horror and sci-fi and fantasy, and my brain has been so immersed in that kind of stuff for so long that I like when my language buddy Christelle, when we talk about English, and she says, well, how would you say this thing? Sometimes the way that I tell her that I would say it is not the way that other people would say it.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's an example. I was practicing. We were on WhatsApp or something, and I wanted to tell her that it was a beautiful day out, but I didn't just want to say il fait beau aujourd'hui because that's boring, right? So what I tried to say, and I typed it out, and I got the conjugation all right. What I tried to say was, it's a nice day today. The sun is smiling in the sky,
Mm-hmm.
right? Nobody says that.
Right.
I do.
Right.
I do. I say corny stuff like that on a fairly regular basis, but that's because I write fiction and I think in fiction
Right.
and so prose just kind of comes out sometimes. And so what she told me was that in France the sun doesn't smile.
Mm-hmm.
Now it does because they do it in literature, but what I had stumbled upon was the difference between speaking and writing prose. And so when you're reading in your target language, especially if it's something that is specifically like prose, this is literature, you might want to keep in mind that some of the turns of phrases that they use and the way that they describe things may not be things that you can use when you speak the language, because
Yeah.
you might go and say, oh, it's a beautiful day. The sun is smiling upon us, and everybody's like, "What on earth are you talking about? The
Yeah,
sun doesn't smile. It's a star." You
right.
know, and so yeah.
That makes sense. I can agree with that. All right, I'm gonna read these last couple of comments, and then we'll probably wrap. If anybody has any more questions, we can answer them real quick. Because it's almost 11 o'clock here. Well, you're in Florida, so it's 11 o'clock there. I gotta, even though I'm working from home, I still have to get up to go to work. Not as early, but Emily Castellanos says. Steve Kaufman. Okay, so Steve Kaufman says you can activate the passive vocabulary, but it's not that easy. There are some words that you only remember passively. If I want to activate them, I need an SRS. Well, I agree with that, but the one thing I'll say is look at it to see if it's something you need to have actively. There's a lot of words in English. For example, what you were just saying, there are ways that I wouldn't say a sentence, and I can understand them when they're spoken to me. I mean, there's literally been times where I've been like, "That's not how I would say that sentence at all," but I fully understood it. So I would just say look at what you're talking about in terms of needing to be active. Like if it's like a word like I can't even think of an example right now. We'll use colors for example, right? We'll say or let's use like a material. I have a black plastic trash bag. You don't have to have black or plastic there. Trash bag gets the point across, and that's
Right,
a
and you also don't need to say that you have that it's a polystyrene trash
yeah,
bag, or that it's it, there's a lot
yeah.
of very complicated ways to describe just about anything that you don't necessarily need.
Yeah, so just look at that. I mean, if it's a word, I mean, don't let me tell you what to do. I mean, if you feel like you need to learn that word, put it in an SRS system. There's nothing. I mean, there's probably words in my SRS system right now that the odds of me ever using are probably slim to none. But I'm also again with this new kind of study habit I'm getting into, I'm trying to rid any wasted time on stuff that I probably won't use. And go for it later. But yeah, I personally I love the SRS. So I will say that. Wise
I think I
guy.
think
Oh,
I think I think real quick, I think that this is something that I've learned about just about everything that I've ever studied, whether it's psychology or history or behavioral therapy. There are always different schools of thought within every community of
mm-hmm.
thinkers and learners, and a lot of times those schools of thought try to be exclusive. Like you either do reading or SRS, or it has to be one way or the other. The reality is somewhere in the middle, and usually all of it. Like Seabolt said, you know, do what works for you. That's the most important thing. If it's
Yeah.
working for you and you're learning and you're enjoying it, do it. Don't ever let anybody tell you, "Oh, that
Yeah.
sucks. Why are you doing that?" You just tell them to piss off because you're enjoying yourself.
Yeah.
You know.
Like for example, if you watched my last video and you said, I would never get rid of Duolingo. Don't. I'm not telling you to. If it works for you, do it. It's just part of me had to step back and say I've been at the same level in this language for several years and I've been using the same study method for several years. Something's got to give. I've got to change it. Yeah. So I mean, if it's working for you, if putting every single word that you come across or every single sentence you comes across into an SRS system, do it. Wise Guy 91 says some languages use certain tenses and cases in writing, but not in speaking. German, for example. This is a continuing conversation. Hold on. James says which tenses is not used. Which tenses aren't used in German speaking? Wise Guy says future two. I don't know what that means. I don't speak German. No one uses that. Thanks for answering. I agree. That's for Emily. Some word, German word, is also way too common in writing. That's funny. I would almost. Okay, so yeah, but I do agree. I don't know about German because I don't speak German, but I do agree. There are I don't know about I don't know. Are there tenses? I know that there's words
There,
in writing that you would not normally use.
there are tenses that you only use in writing, and there are also tenses that you pretty much only hear like from newscasters.
Yeah.
So like when you hear a newscaster say say something that's already happened as if it's happening now, like the president contends that this thing is blah blah blah. That's a special tense that we never use when we're talking, but
Yeah.
if you're listening to the news, then you need to know what they mean.
Yeah.
And in literature, you never talk in third person omnipresence, or
Right.
you never talk in third person, you never talk in second person, you
Yeah.
never talk in that, what is it, there's like a past tense that is in literature but not anywhere else. And so that, I mean, I think there are things like that in every language, and it just, to navigate that, you have to evaluate what your language goals are. Do I
Hmm.
really need to know this?
Yeah.
Do I need to learn future simple tense in French? No, I really only need to know present,
Yeah.
passé composé, and maybe one other one. But
Yeah.
um,
Well, I remember I was in a Mexican restaurant speaking to a guy one time, and it's a dude. It's a little bit further away versus the like Mexican restaurant that's like 5 minutes from my house. But I'll go to this place. The dude named Miguel, and I'll speak to him. He knows that I'm learning Spanish, or can speak a little bit, and I'll speak to him sometimes. And I remember telling him one time, I was like, the thing that hangs me up the most is It's like I understand the concept of like the conditional case, but I can't use it. I don't know how to use it or when to use it. And he said, "It's all right, my friend. We don't either." I mean, so so you know what I
yeah,
mean? Like, and it's kind of that thing. Like, again, you can get your point across. Ultimately,
yeah.
is
If you're communicating and you're being understood, then that's the important thing. My wife's school had an international fair a couple weeks ago, and I was sitting at the table for France, and I spoke so much French that day, it was amazing. But I was speaking to people from Canada and
mm-hmm.
Nigeria and Cameroon and Haiti and France, and just all over the place. And I was so excited about it because throughout the night I was understood, and I understood what they were saying,
Mm-hmm.
and that was the important thing. It didn't matter that the Quebecois person, had some funky words
Right.
I understood what she was saying,
Yeah.
and that's the exciting thing when you can talk to someone from Nigeria in French and you understand them and they understand you. That's a celebration
Mm-hmm.
happening.
Yeah. Also, I think French. Just to I'll kind of wrap it up on this, guys. I'll give you guys. There's like a 15-second delay, so I'm gonna give you guys just a couple seconds. If you have any more last minute quick shoot off questions, let me know, and I will get them answered, or we'll get them answered. But that's one crazy thing about French to me, is at how many African countries speak it, and how many
Mm-hmm.
like how many dialects of it there are. That's it's.
All of the North African ones, speak it, and then like the Ivory Coast and Senegal, and then I think even in Laos over in Southeast Asia,
Mm,
the lingua franca of Laos is French as well.
yep. I know. I
And
know
then there's
the.
French Polynesia too. Like, yeah,
Yep. And then
definitely a worldwide empire at one
it
point.
is. It's crazy, man. Well, and also Vietnam. I did not know this until I spoke with people from Vietnamese. Wow. Also, let me rephrase that sentence. Also, Vietnamese. I didn't know this until I spoke with people from Vietnam. The reason they don't use symbols in terms of because they're an Asian country is they were settled by the French. So
Yeah.
it's
And I
pretty.
think they were a French colony up until like 1964 or something. Yeah,
Oh.
I think while we were waiting for questions, I have something that I was just thinking about that I think is maybe like, so leading up to this conversation that we've had. I've been having a lot of imposter syndrome,
Uh huh.
because I don't speak a bunch of languages, and I don't really dabble, and I don't feel like I'm like an important polyglot or anything like that. And so there's been a little bit of like, what's my contribution to the language learning community. And I think today at work, as working as a behavioral therapist, I was thinking that one thing that I do in my language learning that ties into behavioral therapy is that if you're having trouble, and I think I wrote a blog about this once, but if you're having trouble learning your language and you're feeling burned out, one of the things that you could do is you need to strip it down to the bare behavior. And
Mm-hmm.
behavior works on a conditional system. If you want a behavior to increase, then you need to reinforce that behavior. If you want it to decrease, then you don't reinforce it, or you punish it.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're feeling burned out, and I feel like this is so important because we all experience burnout from time to time.
Yeah.
When you're feeling burned out, or even just do this every day, if you study your language, or even while you're studying language, if you do something that you think is important, reward yourself for it, even if it's just like when I was in school, when I was in elementary school and middle school, I had a hard time learning how to write, and I really hated learning handwriting and cursive and all that
Yeah.
stuff. And so one thing that I would do to help myself from going crazy with all the practice was if I wrote a particularly perfect letter, I would give myself just a 5-second brain break as a celebration for that perfect letter.
Yeah.
And and so over time, I wanted to practice that handwriting so that I could have that brain reward of like, oh, I did something good. And so in my language learning, I tend to almost over celebrate my accomplishments with myself
Mm-hmm.
because I want to reinforce that behavior. I want to keep studying and I want to get better at studying. And so I think one of the important things that I feel I can teach people about language learning that they may not learn elsewhere is that language learning and studying is a behavior. And if you want that behavior to increase, you need to reward yourself.
Yeah.
If you're burned out, set up a reward plan where you're like, if I study my language every day for 2 weeks, I'm going to go see a movie. Or, oh, I knew that word without looking in a dictionary. Good job me. Let me take a 5-minute break. And, those things are not major things, but over time they'll increase your ability to study and they'll increase your enjoyment of the study because you're taking care of yourself while you study.
Yeah. Have you ever looked in? I've never used this personally, but have you ever looked into the idea of time boxing?
I have no idea what that is.
Okay, time boxing is a way of studying where, for example, if you're using, let's say you're doing Duolingo, right? We'll just use that because that's the universal in language learning. You're doing Duolingo, and let's say, so basically, in order to maximize it, instead of studying for, we'll say instead of studying for 30 minutes at one time, you do one lesson, and then you stop, and you go play video games for 20 minutes, whatever. You come back, you do one more lesson. So basically what happens is over the course of time, you study, say, an hour a day. It's over the course of time, but it's also intermixed in between having just this absolute pure, like, euphoria fun for you.
Right.
And it kind of helps you, stick with stuff. And
that's really good because your brain will also start associating the language learning with reward.
Yeah,
and that's
exactly.
the thing, like, with thinking about it in terms of behavior, you're not only, like, you're taking your like higher functioning kind of out of the picture because your reptile brain wants a reward, and so it'll start associating the language learning with a reward, and so that's that's what it does. I've never heard of time boxing, but that's really good.
Yep, just look up some stuff on time boxing. I hadn't heard of it until I watched a video like I don't know, a year ago from the other dude that helps Matt versus Japan with the MIA approach, yoga. And he did 100 SRS cards a day, new cards. So on top of that, we're talking reviews, thousands of cards a day sometimes, to learn all the kanji. He did, I know that you don't study Japanese or anything, but there's a thing called Remember the Kanji, which is basically mnemonics for memorizing these characters. Now, you don't know how they sound or anything like that, but you can recognize them, which helps you learn.
I remember seeing Kevin Abroad doing the Anki decks for kanji, and he's saying like, "Oh, I have to do 1,500 cards today," and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, how are you going to do that?"
Yeah. It's a time commitment for sure. He was talking about that. He said that he would have 100 cards, or how many ever cards he would have to do. And he said he would always make sure he added the new 100 cards, and then if he had to skimp on the reviews, he would. He would always add those new cards, but he would do it with this idea of time boxing. And I started looking into time boxing after I heard him talk about it. I've still never really implemented it, but I've also never implemented mass immersion or anything like that, even though I fully buy into the idea. until
Right.
now. I mean, that's what I'm doing right now is mass immersion.
Mm-hmm.
Granted, again, you don't have to. Am I doing it for Japanese? I don't know. We'll have a video soon, but maybe not, maybe so. But you don't. The
Stay
point,
tuned.
yeah, but you don't have to be using it for Japanese. So, well, man, I appreciate you coming on. I feel like I could talk for another long time. We should just come on again.
It's the beards, man.
Yeah, yeah, it's a connection, man. We'll get another stream going. This is great. Tons of community, you know, questions and stuff as well. So yeah, we'll try to do it again, maybe in a couple of weeks or a month or whenever.
Yeah, totally.
I don't think either one of us really have a whole lot to
No,
do
in
right
fact,
now. So
I just learned that the state of Florida just finally put a statewide stay-at-home order down, and I am kind of not like personally ordered, but specifically ordered to stay at home. So
yeah,
we'll see what happens with that. But
cool.
yeah, so I might have a lot of time on my hands.
Yeah, for sure. We'll do like a 12-hour stream one day or something.
There you go.
No, so
we're gonna learn Japanese today.
Yep, today. It's all gonna happen today. So, man, I appreciate you coming on. Everybody in the chat, thanks for hanging out and talking. And I do have another stream. I think I may have one tomorrow. I don't know, man. I've had them almost every day, so there's a good chance if you tune in tomorrow there will be one, or if not, the next day. So, thank you all for watching. I'm gonna end the stream and. Yeah, hopefully see you guys very, very soon.
Au revoir.